Okay, this is milestone 5. This is where the project ParticleKnight is going to be converted into an executable file so that anyone is able to run this program and be able to play it. But it's been a while ever since the last 4 milestones that we looked over. So let's go over just real quick what has been done for the entirety of ParticleKnight. First and foremost, we're going to take just a quick look at what we have for the level. There were a couple changes that have been made to the level ever since those milestones. I decided to add a little bit more of these little trunks of trees across the level, as is supposed to be more of a lore building experience to the game's story, as it's supposed to be about the knight that is defending the fort while the other forces are away to destroy the forces of darkness. He's the only one left behind, so the only way he's able to fend off the invaders is by placing barricades at some openings of the fort. These were added so that way the player is not able to successfully jump off the level. We also have many more placements of the healing drop-off item, and I've also added some other details, and it's going to be noticeable once I'm able to showcase a little bit of the gameplay. So we're going to go ahead and hit play. Let the magic play. So I hope you were able to successfully listen to all that. That is the new kind of changes and additions for this 5th milestone, is for the game itself to have volume. To be fair, in the last couple of milestones, I have already added the volume and sound effects. Just for the premises of keeping everything organized, I decided to shut off the volume. The volume has already been created via the audio mixer. So what I've done here is, which is interesting, that this keeps getting muted when it's not supposed to. So what I do here is I was able to create 3 different snapshots. There's a copy here, but this was just for an adjustment of an earlier testing. The way that I have this is 3 different types of sounds. This is master, which is self-explanatory within the groupings here. Master is supposed to control all of the sound of the game itself. And they're separated in 2 different categories if you just want to adjust one or the other. Music, which is the background music that will be played when the game is playing. And sound, which only adjusts to the sound effects and ambient sounds that are in place of the game. And the way this works is that I have placed audio from a specific game object game object that manages that right now is level music. Level music takes in and utilizes the output of the sound mixer of music here. It's also set on loop, so that way it continuously plays the music, and I have it play on awake because you want the music to start playing when you start the game. So that is one for the sound effects. And how we're able to take a listen to this is we have the player right here. Within the player, we also have another audio source, which is the launch sound, which takes in the output of sound in the mixer. And we only have this only whenever the character attempts to fire the projectile. It's a little bit of like a spark sound, and that is thanks to the scripts that I'll be showing you in a bit. So how do we control like the volume of the other sounds? For that, I'm using the gameplay camera. Now, the gameplay camera is for the camera controller, excuse me. That would have to be this one right here. I have the audio listener to be the main camera itself. And the reason why I have this is in case of if there are going to be specific places where there's going to be unique sounding. Let's say if I were to have a torch right here, then only the head itself, and I placed it carefully to be the character's head, to be the one that's listening, and it's supposed to be a reference to, you know, in real life scenario, the way that we listen to other sounds in real life, you know, it comes almost from the center, from within ourselves. So that's why I put the main camera within here, and that's only function is to be the audio listener. Okay, just real quick, during gameplay, and this is something that not happens within itself. What I have to do is within the editor, take a moment to pause the game, so I can be able to do this, to be able to mute the music for the meantime. And if you do listen quietly, you should be able to hear the music. It's another sound that I was able to put, and it's under the game object of wind environment. It does the wind, takes in sound, a mixer as the input, always plays on loop. Now, one of the things that I could have done is I could have been able to apply the spatial blend and set this all the way to 3D. If I were to do that, what it would have done is right there. So within the editor, there's going to be a massive sphere surrounding the entire level. Depending on how big depending on how far you want to detect that type of sound, you need to adjust the radius of this sphere within the and it's only going to show you through gizmos. So the way you adjust length of it is going to be through here. It's going to be the logarithmic roll-off underneath here. There's going to be a minimum distance and a maximum distance. You want to adjust these so that way you know where specifically you need to be, and once you're in within the range of that, that's when you're going to be able to hear it carefully. It might be too soft, too low at first when you enter within the 100 square feet of the gizmos range. Once you walk in, you're going to slow down. It's going to be very small sounding. It's going to be very low. And as you get closer and closer to where the center of the game object is, the louder it's going to be for the sound. But I thought this would be fitting that I would put it in spatial blend of 2D, because we're always listening to this environment. And it's not really necessary to put it into 3D, since this is the only area of the level that I wanted to have the wind sound. If this level were to be any bigger, then I would only put it in this specific area, and then everything else it would be like there's maybe splashes, maybe there's fire. And the closer you get to those sounds, the louder it's gonna be. And I will demonstrate a little bit later where you can adjust the volume for this as well. Another thing to keep in mind is that I also added, I've already added this, you've already seen this in the other milestones as well. You also see particle effects taken into effect every time the player is able to fire the projectiles or the enemies, that they fire their own projectiles when they crash into many different types of objects. Particle effects will kick in. And you can also see that the projectiles are leaving behind a trail. That trail is supposed to signify where the shots are coming from. I put those trails, it's supposed to be very short. In many previous milestones, you saw that the lines were longer than they were meant to be. I was able to make the adjustments to make these shorter. And all that's thanks to that, I was able to put it into the bullets here. And right here, the way they adjusted it is through the minimum vertex distance. By adjusting this, you can see how far the trail is being left behind. This is the trail renderer, which is supposed to signify, how powerful the shot is being fired from both the enemy and the player. And so this trail renderer, the way I did this is I haven't added in a material element of fire. The trail will leave like a tiny bit of fire behind it, and that is being casted immediately as soon as it's unleashed. The time, the time is depending on how much time you want the trail to continue to be. That determines how long the trail is going to be shown for the object. So if I left it to 1, it would leave a very long trail of like a second in game time. So to make sure it makes it look realistic, I did 0.2 seconds in time, delta time of the game. And as far as the color, this is the type of coloring that I've used as well. You can adjust it through here to make the trail, leave it being so much of a flashy sense. That's what I why I adjusted the trail. And the same goes for this one. This one I just made it a little bit more generic. This is the enemy bullet. So their trail is a bit, it's also the same, but it's a bit more generic to see the enemies. That's the only unique for the players, that they have a much more nice and flashier adjusted to this. Both bullets will have an effect of particle, which is an explosion spark. I didn't go into more details in previous milestones, but I can say that right now. We utilize the explosion sparks from Creative Commons source of particles, and they're going to be the prefab ones. The prefab ones are the ones that have the spark effect. Now, normally the majority of these prefabs that I've gotten from Creative Commons, they were all given to me. They were all provided to me with a duration of 5 seconds in game time. And there's other types of adjustments that you can make. I, however, did it a bit differently. So I had to make a lot of adjustments here, as I can see that there's a bit of other options in play, just to make sure that there was no noise coming from the particle effect itself. I applied my own type of spark, or own type of sound effect for this spark, and that was another thing, is I've also adjusted the prefab of this, which I mean, it is better to have a good idea of have the original just untouched, and then maybe just duplicate it and have a copy of it saying, like, this is the modified version of it, or like the revised version of it. But that would be for the near future of, like, if I ever utilize Creative Commons items that I was able to find, that will make sure to do that adjustment for any future type of projects that I become involved in. I've also adjusted to the duration of 1 second in game time, because it makes it seem like the appropriate amount of time for an explosion. I've also cut away its looping. There are specific prefabs here that do a loop, a continuous duration of it. I made sure to set it to not looping and 1 second duration, because we don't want this sound effect to keep staying on the level eternally, basically. And I've also adjusted the particle system here that has been provided. I put it on play on awake, just to make sure that it plays when the object is being instantiated. Then when the stop action is active, once it stops, I want this object to be destroyed, because if I don't destroy the object itself, what will happen is, and this could probably create like a massive lag, that's my opinion though, it will create a massive list of newly created instantiated objects of the particle effect, but they would not be deleted. They would stack, and it will continue to stack and stack and stack. So that is why I made those adjustments, so it doesn't stack endlessly, and we are able to just keep the level and the game with minimum amount of objects as possible. So as you can see in the right, there are the sparks that are happening there are destroyed. That's what we want. We want it to be that there is barely any objects. So that way we can make the frames per second be a bit more smoother and faster. So let's so there's another bit that I want to explain, and that would be the volume itself. To be able to control volume, I would need to go back to our main menu screen. Let me just activate this real quick. Volume here. What you can do also is you can even adjust it here. You can control the volume here from within the game. You can also adjust the amount of sound that you want to hear. And of course you have your master sound to control both of these. And that was the type of choice that I have chosen for the game, is to have sort of a soothing type of background music for the main menu screen. Go ahead and slide it back here. So once you play the game, you're gonna even hear that you can only hear sound effects and everything else. So that's what I was able to do for these settings. There's another review of like collecting the health, finding the health. Also reviewing a bit of, you know, killing the enemy scores points. Over time, they also spawn. If I come within range of them, they're going to shoot at me. That is before they're, that is after they come into range and they start chasing. I remember all those collisions, they have taken damage from whatever the enemies were shooting. So let's remember to pick up those health drops throughout the level. I'm provided with 4, so in case you get into a dicey situation, then you're able to at least heal once you be a game over. To win. There's that win. So let's go ahead and retry this, because I also need to show losing. When you get the health to 0, you lose. And how did I lose that health quickly? Well, that's because I already have a script that allows me to demonstrate to you what happens once you get your health down to 0. I apply damage, I inflict damage to the character myself with the press of a key button. But obviously, prior to the release and build of the game, I will not provide that button, as it's supposed to be a debug button. Just to demonstrate that the health bar is indeed decreasing. Score indicator, health, messages. And let's not forget that every time I've paused, which I've already shown within the current milestone right now, is that you pause the game, hit it, to resume, or you can just go ahead and quit. It will always bring you back to the introduction screen. Just a little bit of lore, along with the controls, how to control the character. And then we get to play, and then just a refresher in case you were just in a hurry to play the game. And the options to control the volume. And of course the game's supposed to quit whenever, if it were to run this in an executable file, the game will indeed quit. I have already attested to this, as I already have a build made here. So one little bit of showcase before the end of this recording video. I'm going to show you the executable. Alright, so I made adjustments so that you would be able to take a look at the other screen. I'm actually recording this in 2 different screens, so forgive me for the slight delays here. The quit button. You've already seen the conditions. The quit button actually works. And I have been exited from the game. How convenient. So this is what I'm referring about. This is the lighting that they're referring to within the scene. And it's usually going to be the specified lighting that it has, which is the directional light. It's supposed to be in directional here, so I put it on, left it like that, and so that way it's baked, so that way the rays of the light is going to be constantly shooting towards the level from an angle. From this spot right here, this is where the spot's supposed to shine a lot more. And you're going to just toggle it on or off. And so it makes it look like it's a different type of game when it comes to the lighting. So leaving it on like this, you're going to see this type of lighting when the game runs compared to the type of lighting that is being provided by the game. Or not by the game, by the type of option lighting that is when it's, you know, the camera is providing that light. And that's what it would look like in this aspect, but that's what you would actually see right there. So with this, you can actually see a much more realistic scene, which is much more noticeable when you come to scene changes. And let's take just one last bit of review on the coding and how a lot of things are performed real quick. To reiterate on what I have been saying about the debug options for the editor, how I have it, it's through the usage of these two buttons, which is Z and Q. I've only assigned them specifically to be able to have the health bar to be reflected that it is indeed updating. So the health bar is utilizing the script health bar that I have already set, and that is to have the slider, the gradient, the fill, which these are the, your slider and all the information you're going to need for the slide. And you're supposed to drag them into the editor, and the set max health is going to be provided with this, which is the slider to the max volume of value possible, which is going to be health. The value is going to be equal to health, which is what it's going to be, max health, obviously. Then the value is always going to be equal to health, and then the fill color as well. Normalized value of the slider to be evaluated, it's going to reflect the changes of the bar itself. So once it hits 0, you're not going to see a fill within health. It's going to keep following the amount of fill that it's going to have. That will always update when take damage or heal. Prior to after this milestone review, I will not have these two inputs available to the player, because that will mean that they can debug themselves to either win or lose. So these options, you will not see them in the final build of ParticleKnight. Also, I want to remind you the way that I've set up for the generator for the enemies. Set a reference to the game object, the enemy itself. I placed two different types of positions, X and Z. So we don't want any Y's. So that way they don't just pop out of nowhere from the sky. That can be applied, but for this showcase, I'm not doing it. Then we have the amount of count of enemies that we have. This can be set to 0 because we want to start it in 0. The max count is how many maximum amount of enemies you want to be able to place in the level. And I have set this to 20 in the editor. Then we start a coroutine, and the coroutine does is that it continuously emulates this enumerator, and the enumerator does is that it continuously runs this. It will always take in a specific point from the randomizer. I have this in 50 feet in game units, or editor units, and 31 in editor units. Then we once we have these new values here, then we instantiate the enemy and place a new object within the level like this. I have it yield return new wait for seconds, and I set it to float 5. What that means is I'm giving, basically utilizing, wait 5 seconds. After those seconds are up, then it places a count. Then we did count down and then loop again. That way it efficiently places a new enemy within the level. And obviously this is not going to run once you hit the maximum amount of enemies that you can have possible. Pause menu. How we have this set up is game object reference to the pause menu. If it's paused, a boolean here. And it continuously updates to, if we press it, Then we check if we are in the state of if it is paused or if it's not. If it is paused, then we want to disable that and set all these components true. And set the cursor lock mode to locked, so that way it doesn't have the cursor wandering around the level or wandering around the editor while you're playing the game, as it looks a bit more janky and a bit confusing. It can be frustrating for one to be, who's editing. They want to make it feel like they're still within the game. That's what lock mode is, like this. And then we set lock mode to none. If we're not even paused, we set it to true and we disable everything else, because there's been moments where I would not be able to am not able to press the buttons that I have set up for the pause menu to be able to do set things here. Then for the resume press of the button, we set the pause to false, everything false. Time scale, that's another aspect that I haven't said. Time scale, we're pausing everything, we're freezing everything, every single thing. Game object movements and everything, we set it to pause. Make sure that you're placing this first here, before everything else here. Because if you don't put this on, you're gonna see that the character is still moving even though if it's on pause. It has been shown with the aspect of the shooting, when the player was actually shooting when it shouldn't have been, and you could even see the game object created in front of the point for where the player has shot. You see it spawn but will not move, and this is what can happen if you don't have the time scale set to 0. If it is set after all these things are supposed to shut off, have this later, have this first, so that way they're not able to shoot anything else here. And as for everything else, it's supposed to be unfrozen as well. Time scale is supposed to be set to 1 and then load a new screen when it comes to quit. These things don't need to be applied, as the new scene that we're loading with the quit is the main menu. Then when it comes back to the game itself, these components will already be active by the time you load up this scene, because those components are still left on when the game wants to load up again. So there's no need to put it on the script to be enabling them again here. I've only set it to, in the case of the game itself, when you're trying to retry the level, made sure that those things remain active, because I tested this and it seems that the game keeps memory pretty clear. So when it comes to the awake statement, time scale, making sure that this is set to 1 second within the scene swap. This is where everything of scene changes is happening. I'm making sure that all the components are still active when it awakes. All these states that have been set for the pause menu, I've applied them here into scene swap, so it performs the exact same thing here. And then put in the module of play scene, load scene, name. I've set this like this in the script, so that way it's easier to say, if you want to load a specific script, you want to make sure you're correctly putting the correct name there. And then of course we got the application quit, debug log game quits, to make sure we're checking that this game is indeed quitting when it comes to it. Enemy review, this has already been reviewed in previous milestone checks, So for this milestone, obviously you got your navigator agent mesh, which is always looking for the layer masks that I've applied here. Always looking for what is ground, what is player for the enemy AI. Takes in a walk point of vector 3 with the booleans of, do we have a walk point set yet? Then we have the walk point range flow. This is exactly where you need to go. Time between attacks, if it already attacked or not, the projectile itself. Then booleans if the player is on site or in attack range. Then we have the booleans of site range, attack range. So we know how big these range we can set them, so that way the enemy is able to attack. Always want to make sure that the enemy is tracking where the player is, and we always want to get this component all the time because the AI is constantly looking for them within the update statement. Checks does two different checks. I was able to figure out that this was actually the same as this up here. So changing this actually made everything functioning. If both of these are not true, then the AI is patrolling. If one of them is true and the other one's not, then it's chasing. If they're both true, then they're attacking. I've already explained that patrolling sets always a point to where they want to walk, and the scripts will explain that we're given these values, and this is the new destination, the walk point, and it'll always walk to the specified walk point unless you're able to find the player. It'll always chase after the player, and then it will start attacking. Then it resets attack. Takes damage whenever it is via another script of collision of the bullet. If the enemy gets hit, then they take damage. If it's equal or less than 0, it's health, then they get destroyed. But obviously we have a correlation here with the score tracker script to find the score text and always update that amount before destroying the enemy object. Gizmos are drawn to show you the range of the site and attack. Score tracker basically just keeps track of the score when the player kills an enemy. And this updates to the text serialized here. Editor will need to set this up correctly so that the kill count updates correctly. And this is what it updates. It updates the kill count, and then it applies it to the text in the UI. Then we have references to both the win-lose screens for the player, and just like the pause and scene swaps, we want to make sure that the appropriate components are active or deactivated, or more appropriately deactivated when it comes to the conditions, if the conditions are met. And these are for the appropriate type of screens, the win screen and the lose screen. Of course, we apply those buttons, which loops back to the specified script that will enable everything by the time the game loads on awake. Just a bit of review for the player movement as well. It also has, the movement speed, walk speed, and run speed. Always checking the move direction and velocities. Always checking if it's grounded with the mask, identifying what is the ground check distance and gravity. The height of the jumps that we make it. We give it the controller as well with the animator. And we set those components once the game starts. And we always call for movement And if the attack is being applied, then we start the coroutine of attack, which is the animation of itself, of the player attacking. We always have the appropriate walking animations of animation set floats. Animation set floats is we want to make sure that we're applying the appropriate animation with the appropriate amount of speed that is taken, already set from the animator within the editor, which I'll show you in a bit. Attack enumerator, we obviously set the attack layer, phase 1 and phase 2. And the way that this was done is that usually the attack animation, it's set to be the whole body, but thankfully I was able to make it separated so that way while the character is running, you can see the appropriate attack animation. And that's why we have these two separate attack enumerator script of the attack layer, because this was split apart in two from the ragdoll itself. That was something I did not discuss in previous milestone videos. Again, excuse me if this video runs in a bit longer, but I'm about to wrap it up, as I want to showcase one last little detail, and that was how the animator was done for the game mob. So we have two different types of layers that I was able to set, and layers are a bit of different types of animations that I was able to apply here. This transition here, it takes into the movement, and the movement is basically the takes in the appropriate movement animation that you see, which is, which takes in for a bit of the speed. And the attack enumerator has also parameters that we have set. And there are two different types of animations for movement. There is one of walking, and there's another one for running. So this movement here, basically for walking, is you're always gonna see the character walking, but when it comes to running, you're gonna see that amount already skyrocketing to 1, and you will showcase the character actually running. The attack layer, basically what I did is I split the ragdoll into two, and so the movement of attack is applied here. The empty state, I made it so that the transitions would be very swiftly from the upper half of the body. And of course, after the attack goes back to original position, and that's what it means to set the motion itself. And with the bit of correlation here, the scene is able to, or not the scene, the animation for the character is able to flow smoothly. So that's why it was able to transition from when it's walking and running, it's able to do that attack animation very fluently without having to have that awkward moment of the character just doing a single attack animation while you see it sliding. So with this added twist to it, you can see like a fluent, appropriate attack animation while the character is moving. I also need to demonstrate to you the the Nav Mesh. The Nav Mesh, I did not explain this a bit more thoroughly. The way that this works is that I have this game object of Nav Mesh set, and then I have the Nav Mesh surface script here, in which it is able to do multiple things. Right now we have it set to humanoid because that's what we set it to, like obviously like a human object already moving. This also applies in case if it's a ragdoll, it is applied to the enemy. Then we also have the include layers. What I've done here is I've basically set so that you can basically lay down any kind of different types of layers for specific things that you're looking for. If you're looking for ground, if you're looking for the sky in this case per se, or a health pickup, I'm only putting these out of the equation because we're going to ignore them, as this is going to be, the ground is what the script for the AI I'm using to be able to always detect the ground, and will always move according to where there is the layer accordingly. And that's where the script goes for. And if there are any changes that I make to this level, any changes you make to a level period, you want to make sure that you always bake, because we're updating the layer. If we don't, we're going to get some weird positioning that the AI is going to be getting, I don't know, probably stuck underneath here if we don't do those adjustments. So you can put multiple layers to be able to detect, okay, what is water and then what is the sky. But for now, we just want to make sure we always find the ground, and that game object will navigate through those. You're able to hear some ambience. This is the object that spawns in the enemies. And of course you have ambience outside there. And sound particles and lighting. And this is all basically what has been done for ParticleKnight. I look forward to you guys enjoying as you play the game of ParticleKnight. This is Edgar Hernandez, and I hope you really appreciated this thorough explanation of all the things, features, and aspects that were done to make this game feel alive. Thank you very much.